recurring themes here, so I'll just touch briefly on barley and oats, and I think make sure I leave a little bit of time for questions here if folks have questions. So in the case of barley, again, just huge yields. We actually had fewer barley acres, but we had big yields last year, and it resulted in a big crop. But, not unlike wheat, we're actually we're exporting it like crazy, and so that part's been a good story. It's excuse me. We have big supplies of other grains in Western Canada, so again, there's a bit of a ceiling in terms of where those barley prices can grow, because we grew a lot of wheat, grew a lot of oats and rye and all this other stuff too. Big corn crop in Manitoba, record corn crop in Manitoba last year. All those things are a bit of a dampening effect, and so that puts a bit of a ceiling. But we'll have, certainly the demand side is good, but we will have a bigger carry out here with wheat as we'll see. And then we'll, it's going to, by the way, malt barley demand, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about malt barley, other than the fact that malt barley demand is down, like people are just drinking less beer, quite frankly. So malt barley demand is down, so, it's part of the reason why those malt premiums are really, really soft. People disagreeing with me in the room, it's like, I'm doing my part. I don't know who around here is the problem, we're trying to do our part. I hear you. After the kind of season the Jets have had this year, I'm surprised it's probably not down in Manitoba anyway. I digress. All right, so this is a graph of, it might not show up the best, this is a graph of Canadian barley production by grade. Okay, and so just to kind of illustrate that it wasn't like a huge crop historically, because acres are down. We have big yields. But again, just to kind of emphasize that we actually had a good quality crop. Okay, so part of the reason that malt premiums again were pretty kind of ho-hum is because the quality was good, right? So we're drinking less beer, we're needing less malt barley. You have pretty good quality crop. These guys are not having a hard time finding the kind of malt quality that they need, and so that's. But again, not crushingly large from a production perspective, but relatively high. But so this is a graph of Canadian barley exports by destination. Okay, and just a couple things. One is, first of all, we're exporting a lot of barley this year. So the reason like 25, 26. Not a record, but it's pretty high. But just to kind of also highlight that red on there, that is China. Okay, so as much as we're ticked off at these guys about canola and peas, and rightfully so, man, they're sure buying a heck of a lot of Canadian barley. Okay, so we do lean really heavily into China for barley exports. Again, a bit of a recurring theme here, but barley production across the major exporters also large, right? I mean, this is a little bit, I don't know, misleading is the right phrase. The EU, they do export barley, but they're a huge chunk of that. They consume most of it domestically. Probably if you strip the EU out and focus a little bit more on the likes of like Australia and Argentina, that's where we compete maybe a little bit more intently with. In Ukraine, they had a pretty big crop too. So kind of the message wouldn't change that much. So this is a graph of global barley prices. And just to kind of highlight on here, so that green line on the bottom is Canadian barley, and it's not like necessarily what's trading in Vancouver. What that price represents actually is, say, like an Alberta, elevator price, and then you tack on freight and allow for elevation or that sort of thing. And so part of the reason we've been able to export barley is because, quite frankly, we're just really competitive globally, right? Our barley has been pretty cheap. And so on the one hand, it's like, okay, like our barley is cheap, but it is allowing us to move a lot of barley in export markets. If we weren't moving it out the way we have been, which has been at a really strong pace, we'd see a lot more pressure on our barley prices. And so, but we've got to stay competitive. The other thing too, just in terms of putting a bit of a ceiling on our barley prices, so this is a graph of feed grains in Lethbridge. And so sort of the blue and the red are feed wheat, and the black on top is corn. And just kind of what I want to point out here is, so kind of through the fall and early winter, you can see that barley and feed wheat were way cheaper than corn. And so that pretty much hammered on the brakes for corn imports, or at least, kind of new sales and stuff like that. Feeding a lot of barley because, well, barley's cheap, so we're going to feed barley and more barley, and we're going to import less corn. Those prices kind of now converged a lot, right? And so one of the things that now we have to be a little wary of is more corn going to start flowing in. And so either barley's going to stay competitive, or else they're going to feed less of it, and then supplies back up a little bit. So again, just a reason why, probably a little bit of a ceiling on that barley price. Again, good export pull. We've got to stay competitive. Corn prices have firmed up a little bit, so not necessarily negative barley, but again, from a fundamental perspective, probably a bit of a ceiling. Okay, so This is a graph of Canadian barley carryout. We're going to have a bigger carryout this year. Maybe this shrinks a little bit. You know, like again, there's good export pull. Maybe we feed a little bit more, but you know, there's not a shortage of barley going into this next harvest. Seeded area, I think StatsCan, I forget exactly off the top of my head what they put for acres, but I just seem to remember it being too low. I can't remember what they put in exactly off the top of my head, but I think our barley acres will probably be close to 7 million. I think probably 6.8-ish is kind of what we have penciled in. We'll see, but certainly we're hearing from farmers in Western Canada. They're probably putting more barley in from what it sounds like. So probably a little light from StatsCan in our view. Again, these are all kind of some points I already touched on, so I'll just gloss over this slide and just touch briefly on